Okay, thank you, Dawn. I just want to say thanks to Dawn and the staff and the board of the Winfield Public Library, and especially my colleague there who works with Dawn, your
I don't either.
loyal director there, Matthew Southard, who's I've known for quite some time. He and I are colleagues. I'm director at the North Aurora Public Library, and my full-time hat I wear. Just for allowing me to do this presentation. I really appreciate coming into your households too. During these times when we do Zoom presentations. I really like to do this more in person, quite frankly, but here we are. Now, in my spare time, Dawn had mentioned I am a volunteer. I'm not a paid person with the Forest Preserve District of Dupage County. I've been working with them almost before Brooks McCormick turned the property over and sold it to the Forest Preserve District. And became a researcher and helped the Forest Preserve District with some historical research with their person that they had hired. However, any of the views I expressed or opinions about the property or the people are solely my own. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but I want to make that clear that, I'm not a paid person for the Forest Preserve District, but I am a volunteer, a very proud volunteer for the Forest Preserve District. A great way to volunteer. I also want to put a personal plug in for myself. I'll be doing the same presentation for the Wheaton Library via Zoom again at 7 p.m. I believe on June 11th on there. And then 2 times for the Forest Preserve District. We hope to do it in person at the new renovated indoor arena in their meeting room there on September 12th, and I believe the other date on that is Sunday, July 11th at 2 o'clock. So that'll be on those dates. You can kind of check those websites for that. With that in mind, I'm just going to kind of start here. I've got some text I read generally to start out with and try to make it as informal as possible. Well, for several decades, St. James Farm Forest Preserve in Warrenville, Illinois, was the private retreat for Chauncey and Brooks McCormick families. In 2007, the Forest Preserve District assumed full ownership of the 603-acre historic property. For over 175 years, the property had some type of agricultural or equestrian presence on the property. This is an achievement given the suburban sprawl surrounding the property. The preserve story, however, I feel after doing the research, is really the story of how it was shaped or influenced by a series of its past owners. Upon entering the property today, really, we can witness the reality of the vision for the property by one man, Brooks McCormick. It is my opinion that Brooks McCormick shaped and reshaped his private estate and envisioned preserving it for future generations as open land for the public to enjoy. His sale of the property to the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County was to an organization that shared McCormick's mission of education, conservation, and recreation. He was a philanthropist by birth and upbringing through his family line dating back to Cyrus McCormick, inventor of the Reaper, and continuing through his father, Chauncey McCormick, and his grandfather, Charles Deering. This brief history of St. James Farm is going to focus on the people who owned and lived on the property and how each of these owners shaped the property to fit their needs and lifestyles. My secondary focus is going to be on the background of the buildings remaining on the property and some that, for all of us, have simply vanished, but were of some historical importance for the property. The history is going to highlight the pre-McCormick history of the property from the early 1830s, when Jude and Erastus Gary homesteaded and farmed the property and the land. The narrative is then going to continue through the 1920s, during the estate's first golden era, as I'm going to call it, when Chauncey McCormick, Brooks's father, showcased his gentleman farmer's estate, setting a standard for improving the Guernsey cow breed. The second golden era really began in the mid-1950s when Chauncey's son Brooks assumed ownership when the property was turned over to him into a premier Midwestern equestrian events center. The concluding portion of my history is just going to give a brief overview of the transfer of the property from a private estate to the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County following the death of Brooks McCormick in August 2006. So let's see if my slides are going to work. I always like to give everybody, I know you all have an idea where it's at, but on the screen you should see a map of a lot of the properties owned by the Forest Preserve District. And I think what I want to point out in here is the sale of this property, St. James Farm, was really a linchpin, so to speak, of land property to make a continuous green space for all of us to enjoy between Dan and Ada Rice Forest Preserve, the Herrick's Lake Forest Preserve, and the Warrenville Grove and the Blackwell, and going up north even to the West Dupage Woods. So this is a continual chain of property that with the sale, Brooks McCormick actually felt that that was going to lock all of these properties together for open space for all of us to enjoy. And of course, further east, you have the Morton Arboretum, so that further locks in more green space, particularly along route of Illinois Route 56. This is the entrance, and if you go in the entrance now, Dewey Perotti's name is no longer on there. He's no longer president, but I think he deserves a nod of thanks for also helping out to negotiate and help with the sale of the property in the Forest Preserve District. So this is your entrance. You come in off of Winfield Road. As you come in, you're going to come into the property there, entranceway. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the things you'll see there on that. I'm going to first talk, though, about the Gary family. Erastus Gary was part of a wave of Yankee New England settlers that migrated to the prairies and woodlands of northeastern Illinois to seek their fortune and their future. In 1831, at 25 years of age, Erastus Gary became one of the earliest settlers of Winfield Township in Dupage County. He claimed 640 acres near what is now the corner of Illinois Route 56 and Winfield Road. This desirable location included heavy timber, featuring one of the fragmented woodlands of white and red oak that, to a certain extent, still exists today on the northwest portion of the property. This site was also chosen due to the fact that it was with water consisting of a stream off of the west branch of the Dupage River. The stream kind of runs along just south of Mack Road. The Gary homesteaded the property in the fall of 1831. For a brief time during the fall of 1831 and up until the spring of 1832, he actually left the area after his service in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. During the winter of 1831 and 32, he went to St. Joseph's, Michigan to teach school. He returned in the spring of 1832 to begin farming of the property with his brother, Jude Gary, to whom he sold half of his land holdings on there. By 1848, Erastus turned his entire piece of property over to his brother Jude. Erastus moved closer into the city of Wheaton to 10 additional property he owned near the railroad right-of-way for the Chicago, then what it was known as the Chicago and Galena Union Railroad. Now we refer to it as Metro Railway. Jude eventually married Margaret Kimball and raised 8 children. In the late 1880s, they built a farmhouse on the property to replace an earlier log cabin that had been built on the north side of the property, not too far from the present-day Mack Road. The 2-story framed farmhouse remains on the property. The house would later serve as a boarding house for the farmhands, as a caretaker's home, and today is used as a guardhouse for the Forest Preserve District Security Force. And the gentleman to the right I want to mention was one of Jude Gary's sons. He was Albert Gary, and he became eventually mayor of the city of Wheaton, Illinois, president more formally of U.S. Steel. He was also a judge, a very well-known, nationally known figure in his own right. He is buried, as a matter of fact, if you go over to Wheaton Cemetery in this mausoleum. So very closely connected with the Gary family, and Albert Gary is closely connected with the property as well, where he grew up as a young boy on there. So the Gary farmhouse faced Old Butterfield Road. In the post-World War II era, the state of Illinois moved the roadway 300 feet south of the structure. I'll get to that in a second here. I think here's the structure you see today. And right in front of that, the trail we kind of walk on, the crushed limestone trail, is actually a portion of what used to be what we were referred to as Old Butterfield Road. I think it was also referred to for a while as Hoy Street through the property on there. So the old Butterfield roadbed remains in use today as a biking, walking, horseback riding, and running trail. For several decades, the road served as the main entrance into the property off of Winfield Road. Butterfield Road was widened from a 2 to a 4-lane highway in 2013. Erastus's son, Albert, was born on the farm. He would later become a noted DuPage County jurist, the mayor of Wheaton, and then founder and president of U.S. Steel. He inherited his father, Erastus's portion of the property. And I think in front of this house and throughout the Forest Preserve property, the Forest Preserve District and their educational office have put together some signways just showing you some historical background on the property. So this is in front of that older Gary house. And this is probably one of the older houses on the property, at least dates back to at least 1880s. Now in July, I'm going to step forward a little bit because in July 1901, Albert sold a portion of his land for a right-of-way through the property for the Aurora, Elgin, and Chicago Railway electric interurban line. Later, that would be called the CA&E, or the Aurora and Elgin, as some of you folks may remember. If you're old enough to remember that, the Chicago Aurora and Elgin Railway. The CA&E would figure prominently for St. James during the 1930s, when it became one of the main conveyances to ship milk from the St. James farm property from its Guernsey Herd operations to the Bowman Dairy Company and other milk processing plants in the city of Chicago. So this is an old map to show you the route as you're traveling along the prairie path through Wheaton and eastern DuPage County, splits off, as you know, to go to Aurora and north to Elgin. And there are two sidings that used to come up along the St. James Farm property. One was called the Gary siding, which I believe they could pull off to load milk cans onto a milk train. And sometimes there was even milk cans that were found on the commuter train between where people were sitting on there. At least my grandfather keeps telling me that, not too far also from the Chicago Golf Club. So this was a major interurban commuter line for a lot of commuters going into Chicago at the turn of the 20th century. This pathway I'm showing you now is actually facing south. The overpass you kind of see in the property here, where my little arrows going in circles, is the underpass for Butterfield Road. At one time, the one Butterfield Road, or as it was called, Hoy Avenue, used to come up and over the railroad track and then head further east into Wheaton towards what is now Wheaton-Warrenville South High School property on there. This is another view. This is the old Butterfield Road here. I think I took this picture many years ago in the fall. It was paved at one time. Now it's all limestone. But a lot of people look at this and saying, I wonder why all that utility poles are put in there. Well, the electric line actually ran directly through this property, right, just not too far from the Gary house, which is on this side of the greenway here. So that runs all the way into Warrenville. So this is Warrenville's old Chicago, Aurora and Elgin train station, later to be used as the village hall in Warrenville. And then that was later torn down for a new village hall that was built right near the gazebo in downtown Warrenville. But this is to give you a flavor of really how rural parts of DuPage County were and how important this electric line was, and also how important it was for St. James Farm as well. Now, the next person that was really involved and integral to shape some of this property, particularly some of the early shape of the estate property that Chauncey McCormick would later purchase, was Frank Gorton. Frank Gorton purchased 203 core acres of the old Jude Gary property from Albert Gary in October 1903 for the sum of about a little over $17,000. Gorton was a horse breeder and a Chicago businessman who founded the Chicago Edison Company. So this is a man with a lot of money and means at a time too when electricity was just starting to be used in households and was integral for the Chicago Aurora and Elgin. He was involved in the operation of the Driving Park Racecourse and Fair, which used to be on the north side of Wheaton, as well as a member of the prestigious Chicago Golf Club, which we're going to talk about in a second, how important that also was for the two McCormicks living near St. James Farm. And then Gorton also owned a home in fashionable Prairie Avenue district located in Chicago's South Side. In his retirement, Gorton added to his acreage and purchased in 1903, 04, and 06 additional Gary properties from the Gary heirs. The property will be developed by Gorton for an elegant country estate. The Gorton property is vividly described in several articles that you can find in the Tribune. One Society column in September 2010 issue, the Tribune reports, quote, "The Frank Gorton house, a delightful Georgian structure with terraces and fountains and courtyards to give it its effect of an ancestral manor home. Mr. Gorton is an ardent farmer, keenly interested in every detail of his farm." This gate that you'll see, and again, this is an older picture I took before they grassed it over, is this entrance gate was the old formal entrance that would have a gradually sloping northward bound formal entrance to get to the big houses, we used to call it, the larger home on the property, the country estate home that Gorton built. And later in times in Chauncey and Brooks, this is the entrance you would go into, the formal entrance to go up to the property to either have lunch with Mr. McCormick, come and bring your horses, ride with him through his property and do other activities or stay overnight or what have you on the property. So keep that in mind. That's what this gate was. Now there's kind of grassed over on that. Gorton contracted with the well-known Chicago area architect Jarvis Hunt to construct a country home. The house was described in a June 1911 issue of the Chicago Tribune in this fashion. The house itself, a perfect example of Georgian architecture, the creation of Jarvis Hunt, was built in 1906. It stood on a terrace with a background of a lovely grove of trees and a foreground of sloping green fields where flocks of sheep placidly browse. The Gorton home would later be occupied by Chauncey and Marion Deering, his wife, and Brooks McCormick families. The pictures you're seeing here were actually taken by my grandfather, who worked on the property as a farmhand milking the Guernsey cows. He was a nearby farm boy, grew up on Mack Road, but he was hired to start at 25 cents an hour, probably in the mid-20s when he was a smaller, younger boy. This picture was actually taken in the 1930s of the Jarvis Hunt home, and you get some details on the architecture and things of this nature in here with just how beautiful it really looked. These were taken by my grandfather's, no doubt, Brownie Camry, probably bought from Sears and Roebuck catalog at one time. Part of his scrapbook he kept of his memories of the farm. And I believe, again, this is taken in the 1930s. This little pond that's here with the two swans, there's the proximity to the house. I've got another picture here I'm going to pull up my father took in the 1950s of that same pond that is still there today as you're standing up on that hill looking down on the pond from a thing. I'm coming up with that picture. This is Jarvis Hunt's picture. There's a great article by Leland Schmidt in a Dupage history magazine. But Jarvis Hunt, too, was very predominant architect, created a lot of country estate homes for a lot of large, well-known businessmen in the city of Chicago. He also designed some major architectural pieces, particularly if you're ever in Kansas City, Kansas. He designed the Union Station that is there. If you ever take Amtrak and pull in the station, he designed that, plus a few other public buildings. But he also designed the clubhouse for the Chicago Golf Club and was a member and lived near the Chicago Golf Club for a while. So here's the picture here right now of that bench that you can actually sit on looking kind of down a hill at that same pond that my father took a picture of, which I believe I have in here, unless it's in another version of my slides presentation that I give. But you can actually look at that today. There's a lot of frogs living in there right now, and a few ducks and geese that like to inhabit that area. So this piece up here, if you walk to the hill off of the limestone trail, this looks kind of south. In the tree gathering here is where Butterfield Road used to be. While Mr. Gorton had sheep that placidly, grazed in this front area, Mr. McCormick, Brooks McCormick, later had a whole herd of special breeds of deer, elk, that would graze in front and on the front of his property's front lawn here on there. Also right now too, this is a gate that's on the north side of off the limestone trail. We're not quite sure its origins, but there it is. I think it was the head to the trail just behind the house. Mr. McCormick used a lot of the wooded trails that we walk on today that are now limestone. Pretty much his was pretty much bare dirt and wooded trail, probably leaf covered a lot. This is actually the start of what is today that lower picture on the right-hand side of the McCormick Trail that I really encourage you to walk. It's very beautiful, that northeast corner, northwest corner, I should say, the property between corner of Mack and Winfield Road. So I'm trying to give you an idea of different things on here. So now the history of St. James Farm is intricately connected with the Chicago Golf Club, the Garys, the Gortons, the Wolves, who was another owner between the McCormicks and the Gary family and the Frank Gorton family of the property. And the McCormicks were all members of the golf club. Also included amongst its members was the editor and publisher of the Chicago Daily Tribune, Colonel Robert Rutherford McCormick. The colonel had built his estate just to the north of the St. James Farm property and called it Cantigny, named after a battle in World War I of which he was a participant in. Robert McCormick and Chauncey were cousins. Their grandfather was William Saunderson McCormick. They had all chosen to build their country homes and estates on lots located within a short distance of the Wheaton Golf Club. The colonel and Chauncey were especially close. Many times the colonel and Chauncey would visit with each other on their estates. The colonel moved from nearby, the club, Wheaton Club itself, moved from nearby Downers Grove, Illinois in 1893 to the southwest side of the city of Wheaton. And it was one of the first 18-hole golf courses, I am told, in the United States. One of the early presidents was Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of President Abraham Lincoln, was one of the early people that were presidents of the club. So that golf club was an important venue for why these estates were located where they were, I believe. One of the places that they could relax, play tennis, polo was played there, I believe, on certain occasions. Bathhouses were in that too, as well as banquets, and a lot of fun parties, from what I understand too. A little bit more livelier than the North Shore Wenceslas Club, which is on the north shore of the city of Chicago. And also there was the Chicago Roar in Elgin had a stop right near the Chicago Golf Club. So some of these families could pile into the electric line, head out from the city of Chicago and head out to the western suburbs where the air was a heck of a lot cleaner than it was in Chicago at that time, with all the coal burning furnaces and things and factories on there. In November 1920, Chauncey and Marion Deering McCormick signed the papers to purchase 203.5 acres of what was once the core of the former Lewis Wolf and Frank Gorton estate. They purchased this, Chauncey did, and his wife Marion, at a cost of $90,000. Chauncey Brooks McCormick, who's shown here on the left, the new owner of the Wolf estate, was 35 years of age at the time. McCormick was the grandnephew of Cyrus McCormick, inventor of the mechanical reaper, and founder, Cyrus was in 1847, of the McCormick Reaper Works in Chicago. That would later merge in 1903 with the Deering Harvester Company to form, and other works in Chicago to form International Harvester Company. McCormick's young wife, Marion Deering McCormick, was the daughter of Charles Deering, the founder of the Deering Harvester Company of Chicago, philanthropist, and an very avid art collector. We'll talk about that in a second, and how that influenced both Chauncey and Brooks in their involvement with the Art Institute of Chicago and becoming board members at the Art Institute. Chauncey and Marion Deering McCormick had met at one of the many social gatherings held in Chicago and Chicago North Shore suburbs. They were engaged to be married in April 1914. She was 28 at the time, he was 30. This is a beautiful, elegant shot of a lovely young lady. This is Marion Deering as a young lady, probably just before she became engaged to Chauncey. So they were engaged in April 1914. She was 28, he was 30. Following the end of World War I, they lived for a while in France. During the war, McCormick has served as captain and the quartermaster with the Allied Expeditionary Forces. Following World War I, he stayed on and was assigned to work with a young entrepreneur and a future president, some of us may have heard of, Herbert Hoover, on the American Relief Administration's Polish post-war relief efforts in that country. Upon returning home to the Chicagoland area, Chauncey would become a member of the board of directors for the International Harvester Company, and then became director of the Miami Corporation, which was really an investment or holding company that managed all of the business and financial affairs for the Deering and McCormick families. That company, I believe, is still headquartered at the 6th floor of the Wrigley Building on the north side of the Chicago River there off of Michigan Avenue. He was active in Chicago with national and civic political affairs, as well as being a philanthropist and art collector. Chauncey would inherit his love of art from his father-in-law, Charles Deering, and James Deering, who some of you may have heard if you've ever visited the Dade County Park District's Vizcaya Estate, which is just loaded with artwork, elegant Italianate style mansion and estate down in Florida. If you ever get a chance to go visit it, it's fantastic. In 1944, he was appointed to serve on the board of trustees and later became president of the Art Institute of Chicago. So this is all Chauncey's career and his interests post-World War I into the 20s and 1930s. Chauncey's wife, Marion, shown here again, was a daughter of Charles Deering. The Deering families had a great interest in art and were very active in supporting the Art Institute of Chicago. Marion herself was a very gracious lady and philanthropist, had strong connections with the Art Institute, the Children's Home and Aid Society of Chicago, Northwestern University. If you're ever up there, the Charles Deering Library is named after her father, Charles Deering. So that's a lot of the money to build that library was named after him. In a 1954 Chicago Daily newspaper poll, Marion was voted, quote, the successor to Palder Palmer's wife, Bertha Honore Palmer, as, quote, the queen of Chicago society. So that was probably by the 1940s or 1950s. Kind of showing another headshot here of Chauncey McCormick. So I believe also Chauncey was integral in working with Marion and Chauncey to get them to purchase, after finding out that the Garys were interested in selling the property we now know as St. James Farm, because it was right near his property. And Chauncey was very close to his cousin, as I had mentioned before. So this is a headshot of the Colonel on here. Sort of an early picture also of the Chicago Golf Club that kind of kept this group of millionaires and business people together with like interest on that. So let me catch my breath here a little bit. One of the questions I always get about St. James Farm is what are the origins of the name of the estate property? Well, the couple named their estate after a street in Paris, Rue Saint-Jacques, St. James Street in Paris. They were married on July 1st, 1914 at St. James Street, Paris, at the residence of Marion's uncle, James Deering. It was at James' home that they spent their honeymoon. They were able to bring home with them, back from Europe, many of the furnishings from the residence following her uncle's death. Looking around the home at St. James Farm one day, they made the decision to name their property St. James Farm. It was here on the farm that the future heir and the owner, Brooks McCormick, eventually learned to ride horses, of course. Following World War II and returning to home, Chauncey and Marion Deering sought out a secluded retreat outside the city of Chicago, where they could spend their weekends with their three young sons, who now were Brooks Chauncey McCormick, Roger Deering McCormick, and Charles Deering McCormick. At the time, the North Shore area had been the choice for many wealthy Chicago businessmen and their families to locate their homes. However, Chauncey and his wife were members of the Chicago Golf Club, located outside the city of Wheaton. His wife's uncle, James Deering, lived in a home off of the Fairway, which I believe that home still exists, off of the one street that runs parallel to the park, to the golf club, in a handsome Jarvis Hunt designed home when he was visiting the area. Most importantly, Chauncey's cousin, Colonel Robert R. McCormick, lived in the area on a Cantini farm and estate. And Albert Gary, again, going back to the connection with the Gary family, was an attorney and a former mayor of Chicago, of Wheaton, and owner of the U.S. Steel Corporation, had actually grown up on what would once had been Jude Gary's property. Gary also had performed a lot of legal work for the McCormick International Harvester Company on there. So there's a lot of connections between Gary's and the Albert Gary in particular, and obviously a strong connection with his cousin that lived just to the north on there. Now, the family's first summer on the farm for Chauncey and Marion and their 3 growing boys was in 1922. In 1928, the McCormicks organized the Dupage Hunt Club with Colonel Robert McCormick and the Colonel's first wife, Amy. The Colonel and Amy housed the kennels for the hunt at Cantini. They each housed their own horses in stables on their respective properties. Their 2 estates, along with the leasing of several local farm fields, along with the formed the course for the riders of the club when they did fox hunting between their properties. Fox hunts and steeplechases, as well as point-to-point, were often run between these 2 properties. So they literally had, when you added it up between the 2 estates, well over 1,100 plus acres when they rented some property from farmers in the area so they could expand their runs with their horses for the Dupage Hunt Club as was formed. Now, in the 1930s, this is my favorite piece of architecture on the property, and I think it becomes a lot more favorite for a lot of our photographers taking engagement, wedding pictures, graduation pictures, you name it. Just a fantastic place to look at least from the outside for the time being on the property. They built this beautiful English-style horse barn. It has 12 stalls, large stalls in it. The wood and ironworks in the interior were actually imported by Chauncey from England. The stable features spacious stalls for the McCormick's family of horses. The stables housed fine horses that included some thoroughbreds. The farm also at this time included chickens and a fine herd of Guernseys, and the finest herd of Guernseys in the Midwest. So let me give another shot here. This, to give you an idea, my mother lived on the farm from about 1954 until the time she graduated and married my father in 1958. This is a picture of my mother. She's on the left-hand side here with her future sister-in-law. She married in with the Davis family here, as you might have guessed. My father was George Davis. He grew up on the south side of Chicago near 63rd and Allsted, worked at Sears store for a while, and soon through an mutual acquaintance of my mother, met my mother through the Hudera family that lived on Williams Road in Warrenville, and ended up to be the best man, George Hudera there. But this is my mother, kind of showing you a period shot of that same barn looking kind of towards the east, towards one of the entrances to that farm there. So I thought I'd toss in some of my family photos in here as well with this. Another close-up view, a beautiful mural. We're not quite sure who did that piece of artwork. If anybody wants to help us try to figure out who did that, we're more than happy to invest some time into that. Needs some restoration work, as does the stable itself, which I think this past year received a new roof. So there's a lot of tuck pointing need to be done on the brickwork, but it's a magnificent, one of my favorite structures on the property actually on there. So on that. Well, after December 7th, 1941, with the, let me see, I've skipped a page here. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Guernsey breeding and dairy farm from 1926 to 42. The Guernsey Herd St. James Farm was established in 1926 by Mrs. McCormick with the purchase of May Rose Cherub for $5,000 at a local auction. For over 20 years, the Guernsey dairy operations at St. James Farm were a benchmark for farmers throughout the Midwest. The farm eventually had over 350 acres of alfalfa, corn, and oats under cultivation to take care of and feed these animals, the Guernseys. This was all needed to feed a stock that would eventually number close to 92 head of Guernsey cows. The herd had to be milked and taken care of on a continual daily basis, sometimes twice a day. They were milked, sometimes 3 times. The McCormicks were members of the Illinois and American Guernsey Breeders Association. To profile the work they were doing and to invite local area farmers to learn more about the Guernsey breed, the McCormicks often sponsored one-day educational forums called field days. The field days were sponsored by the Northern Illinois Guernsey Breeders Association. The University of Illinois Agricultural Department participated in the events as well. There were 3 field days held in 1929, 1935, and 1941. The McCormicks freely shared their knowledge with hundreds of farmers from the area in the Midwest, resulted in increased production and quality throughout the dairy industry of the Midwest. They sold many of their cows and calves to neighboring farms and farmers in the Chicagoland area and throughout other states in the Midwest, Iowa, Michigan, even as far away as Ohio, as I understand it at one time. The McCormick dairy breeding operation structures are still standing on the farm for visitors' review. You can see on the farm property large dairy barn, a bull barn, milk shed, breeding barn, and a calf barn as well. The herd won many awards and ribbons at local and state and regional county fairs, as well as the national Guernsey and dairy breeding competitions and fairs. One reporter covering the 1935 field days for the prestigious and elite Country Living magazines noted, quote, "Mr. McCormick told us he would hate our thinking his farm was just a toy or hobby. After our field day at St. James, we believe him and admire him for it." So this was a trend amongst a lot of the upper crust and upper elite business owners, sometimes their wives, more so than the husbands, are raising these Guernsey breeds. I believe Amy McCormick as well had a breed of a set of Guernsey cows on her property. And Amy McCormick was the one that got Marion Deering interested in the raising of this breed of cows. So it was not just a hobby, but they actually were serious. They bred these cows on the property there. So we can see as we walk through a lot of this. Pretty much after December 7th, 1941, with the US entry into Second World War, the McCormick gradually began to downsize and sell off portions of their herd. And a lot of this had to do with the drafting of young men who worked constantly on the farm into service, often limited the amount of people able to milk and tend to the care of the herd. The final 18 head of cows were donated to the University of Illinois College of Agriculture in 1947 and 48 by Mrs. McCormick. In the years between 45 and 54, the McCormicks then began spending more time in Chicago at their Lakeview Avenue apartment or at their winter home near Miami, Florida, near the Deering family estate, which is also open to the public down in Florida. You can go visit that. They often spent their summers in Seal Harbor, Maine, which is now part of Acadia National Park, to enjoy the cool summer breezes off the Atlantic coastline cliffs. Their neighbors included the John D. Rockefeller. So if you're ever near Acadia National Park in Maine, beautiful place to visit, nice place to hike and spend a lot of time there. Just a beautiful place to go to on there. I think I'm building up everybody's wish list or bucket list of places to visit on this tour here we're doing on that. Let's see. I wanted to also kind of backtrack here. The courtyard that's outside the stable includes information and artifacts from the International Harvester Company and the McCormick and Deering Holdings in Chicago. So the archway that you see with the William Deering archway, that's actually from the Deering Reaper Works that was on the north side of Chicago, I believe off of Fullerton, off the north branch of the Chicago River. Huge, just a giant plant, manufacturing plant for manufacturing farm equipment, particularly the Reaper to take care of the wheat and harvesting of that. And then also another artifact is this Reaper manufactory. This piece, which I'll show you in a second, I think I have pictures of this at the factories, was off of the second McCormick Reaper Works that was built on the south branch of the Chicago River on the south side of Chicago after the first works burned in the 1871 Chicago fire. Cyrus's plant burned there in the 1871 fire. They decided to rebuild further south, so they were off the South Chicago branch of the river, and also have access to a lot more of the steel mills that were in that area for the manufacturing of raw materials they would need to build more farm equipment on the south side of Chicago. I kind of tell some younger students that visit the property, think of it as they were the Bill and Melinda Gates of their generation, were in the kind of the digital age. Well, this was the farm implements age. So this is kind of how people were accumulating their wealth by manufacturing, whether that was, many people were in the lumber industry, some people were in the grain industry with the Chicago Board of Trade. The McCormicks were in manufacturing and made millions and millions of dollars off of their products that they were selling to the many farmers throughout the United States. And what a great place to locate your factory in the middle of the United States, near where all the railroads converged as well. So, and this is this inner courtyard you can walk into. And here's the inner courtyard. We have the horse statue Shamashir, which kind of greets you as you come in the parking lot. That whole story there is another story unto itself. That was actually a recast of a statue. That's Mr. McCormick had commissioned a recast of a statue that is St. Stanhope's Gig in England. And Shamashir was the winner of the great English racing horse that was in there. So Mr. McCormick liked that statue so much, he had it recast, put on a ship, brought over to St. James Farm. And it was actually originally on the west side of his house, on that clearing that you're up to on the hill where his property, his house used to be. That was later relocated here so people can enjoy it. And I have a feeling to keep a better eye on the equestrian statue so it didn't get lost or damaged or vandalized back in the wooded area in there. Incidentally, this reconstructed wall originally was an older limestone wall of what we think may have been a barn that was on the property that was owned by Frank Gorton and his family when they had a farm there. So we think this is originally used to be a barn, an older barn at the turn of the century when Frank Gorton and his family owned the property. Interesting enough, we also believe that some of the original beams that are in the English style barn that the McCormicks had were actually from that barn and were reused on there. So that gives you an idea of that. Another close-up of the William Deering archway. This is one of the many pieces of artwork you'll see on the property. This is a brazened copper piece that Hope McCormick, Brooks's wife, purchased for her husband Brooks at a Northside art auction and sale, and had it mounted here in the courtyard appropriately enough near the horse stable. So it's kind of a lot of interesting artwork that I think the McCormicks always wanted to support artists. And I think that is well shown throughout their property with a lot of the pieces of artwork Mr. McCormick has still scattered throughout his property, you can see on there. And this is an older picture before the factory was torn down in the 1930s of the Deering Harvester Works. So you could see the archway. So the archway we see on McCormick's equestrian estate we see today, St. James Farm, is from this factory on the north side of Chicago. And incidentally, this picture is from the International Harvester McCormick Archive that's housed at the University of Wisconsin at Madison for the Wisconsin State Historical Society. Great treasure trove of International Harvester history. There's a close-up of the Reaper manufacturing, and this was actually off of this large odor plant that was on the south side of Chicago. But it gives you an idea of the size of these factories that were in Chicago manufacturing, almost like Ford's plants in Dearborn, Michigan, in that area, manufacturing the Ford automobile later on, at the later turn of the century and things. So that's where that piece of work is at St. James Farm. Shamashir, I kind of told you a little bit about. Here's another shot of that. And go in there and read kind of the history and the story of how Mr. McCormick commissioned that and had that shipped back over there. That piece of artwork is done by another prestigious sculptor of a lot of equestrian statues, very well-known equestrian artist on there. So you'll be sure to read that. A lot of these artwork pieces are also mentioned on the Forest Preserve website on there. So the first golden age, as I had explained, 1920s to 1947 of this Guernsey operations that the McCormicks had. This was their original barn that was on the property. This is probably built more 1920s, 1930s style. So a portion of their Guernsey herd were housed in this stable, which is still there. They also had, for a time, they were housing cows in these stables here that kind of connects the red brick stable onto a workshop and repair shop and a granary storage area that was on this side as you walk through kind of this entryway there. So this is kind of a view on that west side of the barn. You can kind of see where one of the bull barns was at. They actually had two. This is the milk house where milk was brought in. There used to be an archway between these two buildings where they could safely and sanitarily bring the milk from the cow barn into the milk house where they could get it ready to be shipped on the Chicago, Rowan Elgin electric line or distributed to area farmers. And of course, the McCormicks and any of their people that worked on the property, like my family, my mother and my father, my grandfather, I should say, and their grandparents could eventually use some of that milk too. And the McCormicks certainly used that or brought it back with them in Chicago to use at their apartment and home that they had in Chicago. So the farm benefited everybody in some way or another on there. This is the bull breeding barn, which the cool part of this barn is a lot of the original stanchions are still intact. This is, of course, the age before artificial insemination of cows. So they actually performed that task, Mother Nature at work there, of bringing the bull in with the female calf, breeding them. Very dangerous task, as you can imagine, to do that. But they wanted to breed and lengthen and increase their herd on St. James. So they had an entire operation working on here that cost thousands of dollars for operation, some of which they made back in sale of more calves to area farmers in the area. So it's really a fascinating history, and a history a lot of people forget. They think, oh, it was a horse farm mainly and then equestrian events area. This is the 1920s and 30s when a lot of this took place. So we don't want to forget that farming in Guernsey and cow heritage on St. James Farm. This is, I believe, the North Bull Barn on the property, sort of off the limestone trail that you go to the Horse and Hound Cemetery. If you don't make it there, go take a look at that, which is just down this one trail that's on to the right-hand side there. So plenty of places to explore at St. James Farm when you come, particularly with nice weather, and to get out after this long pandemic and be with your family and friends and enjoy the sunny afternoon, weekend, or weekday on there. So 1954 to 2006 is really what we're going to be getting into now, which was really, I think, the second golden age for this farm. We had our first golden age with the Guernsey breeding operations in the farm. With the death of Chauncey McCormick, let me back up here a little bit. So following Chauncey's death due to an issue with his heart in September 1954, Marion was forced due to ill health to reduce some of her activities and gradually turn over management of the estate, really a trust and life estate, to her son Brooks. The property had been placed into a trust by the McCormick family. It was turned over to Brooks McCormick. Brooks had married Hope Baldwin in 1940 and had their family consisting of 4 children. Eventually, Brooks came along, their firstborn, Abby, Mark, and Martha. So they had 4 children. Then a lot of times they spent a lot of time, a lot of weekends on the farm here. Well, McCormick and his wife immediately set out to work on remodeling, updating, rebuilding, and adding on to the estate property following the death of Chauncey McCormick in September 1954. The transformation of the property included a complete renovation and modernization in 1958 of Frank Borton's Jarvis Hunt designed Georgian-style manor home. The McCormicks removed and lopped off the 3rd story of the house, totally modernized the interior of the home for a growing family. In 2006, per his instructions, the structure would be torn down per McCormick's living trust instructions following his death. Near the home was a garage and an apartment above it, and a cottage that was referred to as the chalet. These former structures were where McCormick's groomsmen, herdmen, butlers and drivers, maids and cooks would live when they were staying on the property on weekends. And I've been delving into a lot of the local census, particularly the 1930s and 1940s, and they have a whole listing in there of, drivers and Swedish cooks that would work on the farm. My grandmother cleaned house for Chauncey, and then for a while for Brooks McCormick for a while. She remembered going into the house. From her recollections, when Chauncey was there, it was very dark, a lot of heavy furniture, heavy drapery. She didn't like it too much, but it was kind of hers to take care of for a while and clean for the McCormicks. And so I think a lot of Brooks's job then was to try to modernize and update it for his modern lifestyle in the 1950s and 60s, as it should be. On that. So let me move forward here. Then in the let me go take a look here. In the 1980s and 90s are considered the second golden age. in terms of work activities and development for the farm. In 1979, Brooks McCormick retired from International Harvester Company after 40 years of service with IH, International Harvester Company. He immediately turned his attention to the redevelopment of St. James Farm and his post-retirement little activities there planned. The center of his activities were the development and improvement of St. James Farm. He relied upon a larger staff and a team of farming managers and landscape supervisors. His focus, however, would be on equestrian activities on the farm. To assist him in this endeavor, he hired in 1973 John and Donna Davies. Davies and McCormick teamed up to establish the St. James Farm Therapeutic Writing School for the Handicapped. John Davies was an expert on therapeutic writing for the blind and physically handicapped. He authored a book in 1960 titled The Reins of Life. He was instrumental also in forming the National American Handicapped Writers Association. John and his wife Donna opened up the stable and indoor writing arena twice a week to the Easter Seals Foundation and to other handicapped individuals to receive writing instruction. The arena served as an indoor venue, and this indoor arena is still there. It's been modernized, a little bit updated for us today. The program assisted hundreds of children and adults from various programs within the Chicagoland area that served those people with challenges or disabilities. Under Davies' direction and under guidelines set by the United States Equestrian Association, horse trials were held in St. James Farm in the 1980s. In addition to the riding school and horse trials, McCormick and Davies held their own annual steeplechase race, which some of you that are listening may have remembered. The course was constructed on the south side of the property, was over 1.5 miles in length. The course and race were utilized to raise funds for the nearby Marion Joy Rehabilitation Hospital. Now I believe is part of Northwestern Hospital in Wheaton. I believe the Franciscan Sisters had run that operation and may still have some hands in it as well today. The steeplechase event ran from 1985 until 1999. The events included carriage driving, one of Mr. McCormick's favorite hobbies. You'll see some of his carriages if you come on our property that he had, either antique or reproductions, jumping and dressage that attracted over 10,000 spectators and participants. Just a crazy, wild event, but very festive, very elegant type event as well. The McCormick Event Center construction included the addition of a picnic pavilion, which if you go on the property now, you can see that I think that's under reconstruction now and rehabilitation. That picnic pavilion will eventually become available back. You have company corporate picnics, wedding events, family reunions. That's going to be back in operations to rent. I would think hopefully by next season. You'll go there now, it's kind of torn apart. There's also 3 former dressage arenas that are now turned into, I believe, wildflower or wild different plants are planted in those performance arena. And then this picture here that I'm showing you is this magnificent Roman style barn, 65 stall round barn and fence and space for a worn up arena. This is really a cool structure. The Roman style barns were originally built so you can race and train your horses on the interior structure with these stables kind of encircling that interior on there. Mr. McCormick decided instead of putting sort of an exercise area, he actually has it divided up into some shower stalls and bathing stalls for the horses. Because when you have these events on the property, when he did, you'd have people come all over. They need to house their horses for a week or a weekend on the property. You needed some facilities for them to stay that were appropriate for a lot of the horses that came on the property, to take better care of them and to feed them as well. So a lot of good history here we're getting into. I have a lot of older pictures here. I need to update some. This is looking east towards the roof of that indoor, stable, Roman style stable. This sculpture was done by Marcia Weiss. That name Weiss, you may recall if you're into architecture. She was the daughter of Mr. Weiss, who was a well-known Chicago architect in the Chicagoland area that designed a lot of homes. She herself was an interior designer and design person. Mr. McCormick requested and commissioned this piece of sculpture and artwork that's kind of shaped like a horse trough, really, and a lot of symbolism on there too. A lot of high quality materials were put into that. And some cobblestones from some former streets that Mr. McCormick was able to get to put in that sort of greenway. Unfortunately, the wonderful hedge that was nicely trimmed when Mr. McCormick was around slowly has died out. Who knows if they're going to replace it the way it was, but it's kind of all torn down now. But that gives you an idea what that looked like probably in the 80s and stuff. Nearby is another example of artwork that Mr. McCormick commissioned from Fiore di Enrique, a well-known Italian sculptor and artist in her own right. Fiore did this work of the horse Something Special, who is buried at the Horse and Hound Cemetery. His granddaughter, Fiona Hunt, Hillary McCormick Hunt's daughter, is pictured in this sculpture. And I think there was another smaller commission of this done, but this is something you can see. So that's who that is. That's Fiona there in her bare feet with her dress on, holding her horse Something Special and things. So there were a lot of big horse people and equestrian lovers too, particularly on that Hunt side, the McCormick Hunt side of the family on there. Another Fiore di Enrique sculpture is a dolphin sculpture. And often people say, why is there a dolphin sculpture in the middle of this picnic pavilion? Why isn't there like a horse sculpture or something else? I don't think I have the answer to that question. I think I can only surmise too, that again, I think Mr. McCormick went to Fiore again, said, hey, I have a centerpiece I need you to create for this fountain. I want you to create something that means something to you and is meaningful. So this again is what she created on there. So it's really a nice sculpture that's in the middle of that fountain. So you can enjoy that as you're picnicking eventually in that new renovated picnic pavilion that the Forest Preserve District is working on in there. But again, this is McCormick's effort of his love for art and to commission works of art. I hope I'm not running over time here. Hopefully not. We're approaching 8 o'clock, so on that, going a little bit over time. Needless to say, though, this is one of the older barn structures on the property on there. So this used to also house some of the Guernsey cows on the basement floor or the ground floor of this stable on there. This actually used to be an entire farm on the east side. It used to be called the East Farm, if I recall, as I was a young boy, that my grandmother said that. I think the Hageman family lived there, originally owned by the Bullwig family of Warrenville and things from the older maps I've looked at on there. Another odd piece or different piece, I'll put it not odd, I shouldn't say that, is a Burlington Route way car, or as some of us refer to it, caboose. Well, it's a way car from the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railway. Mr. and Mrs. McCormick purchased this when Channel 11, many years ago, you may remember the 70s, had auctions where they auctioned off unusual things to make money for the WTTW auction. So this was something he purchased. Originally, it was up near his house. I think it was meant as something that his grandchildren could play in, or maybe it was a man cave for Mr. McCormick up off of his property, who knows? But eventually was moved back and mounted here to become an office for the judges of the equestrian activities to decide who won that heat or that race or that carriage drive, so they could come there, deliberate, and then walk out of there and deliberate. So it's a unique piece of history, railroad heritage we have, part of the Burlington Route, Burlington and Quincy Railway. And the neat thing about this caboose, if you get a chance to ever go in there when it is open, all of the original pieces and stanchions and equipment and furniture are still in there. If you go to Causley Park, you'll see a similar way car or caboose, as the kids would call it, at Causley that's kind of totally gutted so the kids can have fun in it. This one, you're actually going to be able to witness railroad history by going into it when that's open. On occasions, I think St. James Farm has had it open for peeking into and walking through. So watch out for that and kind of read these way cards that are near that too. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more. This is the book that John Davies wrote on this whole technique of therapeutic writing. I may be wrong about this, but I believe there's a therapeutic writing school still in the city, in your fair village of Winfield there, down at the end of Beecher off of the one park on there. I could be wrong. I don't know if that still exists, but there's a lot of these throughout the US. This is a big thing for a lot of people that are unable to get up and mobilize themselves enough because of illnesses, you name it. And a lot of former veterans are finding that this is good therapeutic writing for them that are suffering from either PSTD or people with physical issues where they've lost a limb or something, that it gives them a sense of freedom to ride, a sense of self-esteem and dignity to be able to control and work with the animal. So this is another one of efforts that John Davies teamed up with Brooks McCormick to do a philanthropic effort, which was really, I think Mr. McCormick was very proud of this St. James School for Therapeutic Writing, no doubt about that from what I hear from people. This is a newer shot I just took not too long ago before everything greened up. I need to get a greened up shot, better pictures. But recently what we did at St. James Farm, the board at Forest Preserve District added on an addition. Originally, this building kind of cut off here, but we needed to add amenities of restrooms. We had water pulled into the property, the Forest Preserve District did just recently, so we could have sort of a little bit more dignified restrooms for people to come to when they need it. But also at the north side here, we have a room that can be rented. You'll have to check into that on the Forest Preserve website. We have a visitor center, a small visitor center, where eventually, we've been having some rotating exhibits in there. If any of you have horses and are equestrian fans and you'd like to do some indoor riding with your horse, guess what? You can rent the indoor arena for, I think, a couple hours or 2 hours to bring your horse to exercise it and do some exercises and training with them in the indoor arena. So you actually have a multi-million-dollar complex at your disposal to help you out with that. On occasions, I'm going to put a plug in for Dan and Ada Rice, the Forest Preserve District, Dan and Danita Forest Preserve. They sometimes bring their horses in there and do talks about the equestrians and horses and things like that for adults, and also the kids too get a big kick out of it too as well. So this is a cool building, very neat. One of the first events that was held in there was Abby McCormick's debutante party, which was held, I think, in 1974. So McCormick said, you got to get this thing completed because the big event we're going to do is going to be my daughter's debutante party. And my sister, who's about a year older than I am, was across the street from the property here in my grandmother's house, my grandmother's binoculars, watching as dignitaries poured into this building for a night of festivities, and the Davies Orchestra that did the rounds of the debutante parties on the East Coast and Chicago played away the night. Champagne, I'm sure, was flowing, and fine food. So that was kind of an inside track of what they did in that property at that time. So I'm going to kind of wrap up things here a little bit quickly. In 2000, McCormick sold his estate, 607 full acres, to the Forest Preserve District as a life estate. He continued to retain access to the life on the property until his death. The property was sold for almost $43 million, about 70,000 plus an acre. Provided a key provision as a key linchpin between all the Forest Preserve districts, as I explained. McCormick's vision was really to provide open lands within Dupage County for future generations. Mr. McCormick also co-founded the Conservation Foundation, which has also helped preserve thousands of acres, not only in Dupage, but I think in some connected counties here in the area. So pretty much on September 19th, the Dupage County Forest Preserve also had a St. James Farm Endowment Fund established with a donation from Mr. McCormick. The Forest Preserve District gained possession of the property on July 1st, 2007. I was there on opening day when we opened it up in November 2007. Following the stipulations of McCormick's will, 8 buildings were demolished. 3 homes were among the structures on that property. And I think St. James Farm at this point is now at the point where they're working on, the Forest Preserve District is working on a long-term plan of improvements at St. James Farm. You and I have probably, as if you wandered on the property, has witnessed a lot of that, the visitors parking garage, the water being brought in, so we have some potable water on the property. And eventually, so we can get everything fire protected with fire sprinklers to be in code from a private estate to a public property. And eventually have some of the buildings more open on regular tours is what I think the Forest Preserve District ultimately would like to do. Due to the pandemic, the past couple of years, we had attempted to host an annual family field day event, which some of you may or may not have attended. Our last one was, gosh, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years ago. So we're hoping, I know the Forest Preserve District and their educational department and the board would like to probably get back on track with some of that as well. Some of those really activities on there. So, I'm gonna now kind of end my presentation and see if there's any kind of stop screen sharing of my thing and see if, if there's any questions. I know I